Most people think there are only two options when somebody dies: a traditional funeral or cremation, but a new option is growing in popularity across the nation, particularly with people who are environmentally conscious. It's called a green burial, and the idea behind it is to help the body decompose as naturally as possible. As much of a new idea it is in the modern world, it harkens back to simpler times. In early U.S. history, there weren't really any funeral homes. People prepared their loved ones at home. But in the days of the Civil War, soldiers were dying away from home, and bodies were preserved using chemicals so that they could be sent home for burial. The process of preserving bodies in this way is called embalming. Embalming really took off after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. His body was embalmed and sent to several funeral homes in different cities for 12 days before resting in his hometown of Springfield, Illinois. Historians say it was the first time that many Americans had seen an embalmed body before, and they were impressed by the way it looked. Today, it's somewhat rare that a body doesn't go through the embalming process, especially if the family requests an open casket funeral. But environmentalists are learning that the chemicals involved can be harmful to the environment and mortuary workers. One of the biggest complaints, formaldehyde. The chemical is rather common and is used in more places than just the funeral industry. But the CDC calls it highly toxic, and long-term exposure is known to cause cancer. Morticians, the people who prepare the body, must wear protective gear when handling the chemicals. The Green Burial Council is a national certification and advocacy organization centered around supporting environmentally cautious burial practices. In order for a funeral home or graveyard to be certified by the Green Burial Council, they must adhere to strict guidelines. There is only one funeral home in West Virginia that is certified by the organization to perform a green burial: Smith Funeral and Cremation Care in Morgantown, West Virginia. The funeral home offers traditional as well as green funeral options, and green funerals can still have open casket visitations.
So the chemicals that we would use if someone wanted to still be arterially embalmed and quote-unquote laid out traditionally or have an open casket public visitation, these particular chemicals are made of essential oils that will still cleanse and still disinfect the body, if you will, so that the body can be held for a shorter period of time and have an open casket visitation if they request. Now, there's also, by means of, if the person does not want to be arterially embalmed, refrigeration can be used, topical sprays, that type of thing.
Oftentimes, environmentally friendly options come at a cost, but green burials typically don't cost any more than a traditional funeral.
Green burial can actually cost far less than a traditional burial.
As far as a funeral home.
Right, as far as the funeral home charges go.
Right. Charges go.
Yeah, go ahead with that. Yeah. As far as the funeral home charges, it can be several $1,000s less. There are expenses to think about though with the green burial, cemeteries and whatnot that you will have to pay, but those are out of the control of the funeral home. But as far as what we can do for you, most of the time at least 40 to 50% less than what a traditional funeral would be.
Someone who opts for a green burial can be buried in a biodegradable casket, such as wicker, or in a cloth shroud. Traditional graveyards often require a vault, kind of like a casket in a casket, made out of strong materials like concrete. This is because as decomposition starts, the ground starts to sink where the person was buried. In a green burial, a vault is not allowed, so it can be hard to find a cemetery that will accept a green burial. If you want to do a green burial, you might end up at Penn Forest Natural Burial Park, which is near Pittsburgh. Smith says that the people they work with often choose a plot here. It's the closest graveyard that is certified by the Green Burial Council. As of now, there are no graveyards that are certified in West Virginia. Penn Forest started in 2008 and is the first green burial ground in Pennsylvania.
Because we had heard 10 years before that down in South Carolina, they had opened the first green cemetery in the United States, was Ramsey Creek. So we figured by that time there'd be lots of them, And it turned out though that the nearest one to us was up in Ithaca, New York. And looking at the map, it was almost a 6-hour drive up to Ithaca. I said, I can't go up there and buy a cemetery lot because nobody would come to my funeral, so we need to do something else. And I just feeling bad about that with Nancy. And I said, somebody ought to open a green cemetery in Pittsburgh. And she looked at me and said, well, what are you doing? That's sort of what I've been doing ever since. So.
Now Pete helps others open green cemeteries across the U.S. Marianne Perry came from Oregon to Pennsylvania to learn about maintaining a green cemetery.
I'm part of a group of people that are working to open, it's called the Forest Conservation Burial Ground, and it's at Willow-Witt Ranch, which is in southern Oregon, just over the California border. And we don't have a dedicated natural burial ground in our state at this time.
If you take a walk in Penn Forest burial groves, it won't look like the traditional cemetery. A traditional burial site and a green burial are very different. To start, traditional burials are dug 5 feet down, while green burials only have to be dug 3.5 feet. Because green burial sites don't have a vault and are likely to sink down over time, fresh graves have more dirt on top. After a month or so, the excess is leveled off. Green burials are not marked with tombstones like a traditional burial. If the graves are marked with stone or wood, it must be flat and native to the environment. Sometimes graves use GPS coordinates.
We don't use any chemical pesticides or herbicides to be designated a natural burial ground. You can't use any of that stuff. So we got goats originally to clear out brush, and we deal with invasive species in different ways.
Penn Forest Cemetery is on 35 acres of land, but that also includes a barn, a couple gardens, a hiking trail, and a wildlife preserve.
The flower picking garden we started last year, and it was pretty popular, so we decided to expand this year, and it's for whoever comes to visit graves or here for burials. They can pick flowers to lay on the graves or for the burial, or even just take some home.
Laura says people often come up not only to visit their loved ones, but to walk the trails. Penn Forest stays active in their community by holding events, such as yoga with goats and teaching people how to build their own coffin. People who come here for their burial come from many different religions. Some like the idea that they are essentially giving back to the earth, and some want to be buried in the woods under a tree. Often, it's people who love nature.
We get a lot of people that have grown up on farms, and they come here to look at lots, and I take them over to see the barn animals, and they're like, oh, I'm sold.
Both Penn Forest and Smith Funeral predict that we will see an increase in green burials as people learn more about them. Smith says that they haven't actually done a green burial yet, but they do have several people who pre-arranged with them to have a green burial.
You know, with being in mortuary school, it was a topic that was only really touched upon. So it's very, very, very new, not just here, but in the funeral industry itself.
That's actually a great point because, and that kind of shows the generational difference between us, she and I. She is just getting ready to graduate mortuary school. No, I've been out of mortuary school for 20 years. When I graduated mortuary school, there was little to no emphasis at all on cremation. Even most everything that we did, we were geared toward the traditional funeral aspect of everything. Now you have students that are coming from mortuary schools that are being trained, as a certified crematory operator when they come out of the school. And I think that you're probably going to see that progress now as well, that you're going to have a growing sect of educators who realize that green burial is going to come around. It is going to be formidable in our business, and for students and the generations of funeral directors to come, it's going to have to be something that you're well versed and educated in.
Smith also says that being able to provide more options to people is important to them.
We are a service-based industry. We're here to do what the consumer asks us to do, whether it's in line with my beliefs, or not. So having the knowledge that you can provide all of these services to the public just furthers you as being a good provider of end of life care to people.
For WBOY.com, I'm Shayla Klein in Morgantown.